I never thought an old, dusty book could change my life. It all started on a quiet autumn afternoon when I stumbled into a tiny bookstore tucked between two towering buildings on a street I had never noticed before. The place smelled of parchment and history, a scent that wrapped around me like a warm embrace. The owner, an elderly man with sharp eyes and a knowing smile, nodded at me as I browsed through the shelves. My fingers trailed over the spines of the books until they landed on one with a leather-bound cover, its edges worn with age. The title had faded, but something about it called to me. Without a second thought, I picked it up and flipped through the pages. That's when I saw it, my own name scrawled in the margins of a chapter. A shiver ran down my spine. I had never seen this book before, yet here was my name, written in ink that had aged along with the pages. Heart pounding, I flipped back to the beginning and started reading. It was a story, my story. Events I had experienced, conversations I had had, even thoughts I had never voiced out loud were all written there in eerie detail. I slammed the book shut and looked around, half expecting hidden cameras or some elaborate prank. But the bookstore remained as quiet as before. The owner raised an eyebrow, but he said nothing. My hands trembled as I turned the book over, searching for any clue about its origin. There was none. Against my better judgment, I bought it. That night, I sat on my bed, the book lying open before me. I read deep into the night, my breath hitching as I reached a chapter that described an event that had not yet happened. A decision I had not yet made. It was a warning: if I chose one path, my life would continue as it always had. If I chose another, it would lead me into the unknown. The next morning, I went back to the bookstore. But it was gone. The space it had occupied was now a blank, graffiti-covered wall, as if the shop had never existed. I stood there for what felt like hours, clutching the book to my chest, my mind racing with possibilities. That was the day everything changed. That book held my past, my present, and perhaps my future. The question was, did I dare turn the page? With a deep breath, I flipped to the next chapter. The words on the page sent a chill through me. The stranger arrives tonight. You must not trust him. My heart pounded. Who was this stranger? Where would I meet him? The anticipation gnawed at me all day, making every interaction feel like a potential encounter. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard a knock at my door. My pulse spiked. I hesitated before opening it. A man stood there, his face partially shadowed by the dim porch light. He wore a long coat, and his piercing eyes studied me as if he already knew everything about me. You have the book, he stated, not asked. It doesn't belong to you. My grip tightened on the doorknob. Who are you? He exhaled sharply. Someone trying to protect you. That book is dangerous. You need to give it to me. I swallowed hard. Every instinct told me to shut the door, to send him away. But then I remembered the warning from the book. If this was the stranger it spoke of, then trusting him was not an option. Still, I had so many questions. Why is it dangerous? What does it mean? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He glanced over his shoulder, as if checking for something or someone. Because it writes itself as you live. And if you keep reading, you won't just know your future, you'll lose control of it. A cold shudder ran through me. The book had already predicted his arrival. What else had it written? What would happen if I disobeyed its warnings? More importantly, what would happen if I didn't? I can't give it to you, I finally said. His jaw tightened. Then you've already made your choice. But remember this, once you turn the next page, there's no going back. With that, he turned and disappeared into the night, leaving me gripping the book tighter than ever, my mind spinning with more questions than answers. Did I dare turn another page? My fingers trembled as I held the book, the weight of the stranger's warning pressing down on me. I hesitated, staring at the pages as if they might lunge at me the moment I turned them. But curiosity is a beast that refuses to be tamed. Swallowing my fear, I flipped to the next chapter. The ink on the page darkened as if freshly written, the words shifting before settling into place. You turned the page. He knows. A sharp knock rattled the door again. I jolted, the book slipping from my hands. My breath hitched as I backed away, heart hammering against my ribs. Was it him? Had the stranger returned? Slowly, I reached for the doorknob, my pulse echoing in my ears. This time, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. I grabbed a heavy paperweight from the nearby table, my fingers tightening around its cool, solid form. Taking a deep breath, I flung open the door. But it wasn't the man in the long coat. A woman stood there, her eyes wide with urgency. Wind whipped through her dark hair, and she clutched a similar book to her chest, its cover identical to mine. You have to leave. Now, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. He's not working alone. A chilling gust of wind blew past me, sending the pages of my book fluttering wildly. My eyes darted to the open chapter, where a new line had appeared. The woman will come, but she is not alone. I froze, the words burrowing into my mind like thorns. My gaze snapped back to her, suspicion curling in my gut. Who are you? I demanded, keeping my grip firm on the paperweight. She hesitated, then slowly opened her book. The ink glowed faintly in the dim light, reshaping itself into a new sentence before my eyes. Trust me, or lose yourself. A low hum filled the air, a vibration that seemed to pulse from the very walls around us. The light flickered. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor. I didn't need another warning. I grabbed the book and ran. The woman followed close behind, and as we sprinted into the night, I heard a voice that didn't belong to her, or the stranger. It was inside my head, curling through my thoughts like smoke. You cannot escape the story. The road ahead twisted, but the path was no longer mine to choose. The book had already decided. As we ran, my breath came in ragged gasps, but I dared not slow down. The woman stayed at my side, clutching her own book as if it were a lifeline. The shadows behind us shifted unnaturally, stretching toward us, moving in ways they shouldn't. Where are we going? I demanded between breaths. The library, she answered. It's the only safe place. A deep, guttural growl rumbled behind us. I risked a glance over my shoulder and instantly regretted it. The darkness had taken shape, an amorphous mass with glowing eyes, its tendrils slithering toward us like living ink. The book burned hot in my hands. A new line appeared as I watched. Run faster. I pushed myself harder, my legs screaming in protest as we rounded a corner. Ahead, an old, towering library loomed, its grand double doors barely visible in the dim streetlights. The woman yanked on my arm, pulling me toward the entrance. We're almost there. The doors burst open the moment we reached them, as if the library itself had been expecting us. We stumbled inside, and the heavy doors S. The library's towering bookshelves seemed endless, the dim glow of old chandeliers casting eerie shadows over ancient texts. The librarian's words echoed in my mind, a death sentence disguised as a whisper. The woman grabbed my wrist, her grip tight. We have to find the archivist. The what? I whispered. The one who knows how to rewrite fate, she said urgently. If we don't find him before they do. A deafening crash erupted from the far end of the library. The doors, the same ones that had slammed shut behind us, splintered as something forced its way through. A tall figure in a tattered black cloak stepped forward, his presence sucking the warmth from the room. His face was obscured, but I knew. The stranger had returned. You cannot hide, he murmured, his voice like rusted steel scraping against stone. Books flew from their shelves, pages flipping wildly as if an invisible storm had invaded the room. The librarian took a step back, his face pale. It's too soon, he muttered. The story is moving too fast. The woman yanked me forward, weaving between shelves. We have to go deeper. The ground trembled beneath us, the bookshelves stretching taller, shifting, as if the library itself was alive. A passage opened where there had been only solid wall a moment ago. The book in my hands burned hot again, another sentence forming as we stepped into the unknown corridor. The deeper you go, the less of yourself you will find. The stranger's footsteps echoed behind us. We had no choice but to run. But with every step forward, I could feel it. I clutched the book tighter, my pulse thundering in my ears. The archivist's fingers hovered, waiting, his gaze steady but expectant. Behind me, the footsteps drew nearer, each step echoing with an ominous finality. "No," I breathed. "I can't." The woman's eyes widened. "You don't understand." But I did. I understood too well. The book wasn't just recording my life, it was dictating it. If I gave it up, I would be handing over my choices, my destiny. And yet, keeping it meant I was bound to its unpredictable will. Either way, I wasn't in control. I had to change that. Without another word, I turned and ran. The woman cursed but followed close behind. The archivist's sigh carried an air of finality, but he made no move to stop us. The shelves shifted wildly as if the library itself was angered by my defiance. Books tumbled, pages flew, words lifted off the paper and swirled in the air like fireflies. Then, the stranger's voice rang out, sharp as a blade. "You're making a mistake." I risked a glance back. He stood in the archway, his dark coat billowing despite the still air. But he wasn't alone. A second figure stepped into view, another woman, her face eerily similar to mine. A perfect reflection. I stumbled to a stop, my breath catching in my throat. The woman beside me gasped. "No. That's not possible." The doppelganger tilted her head, her lips curving in a knowing smile. "Oh, but it is. I told you, you cannot escape the story." My hands trembled around the book. "Who are you?" "You." The reflection took a step closer. "The version of you that obeyed." A sickening chill crawled down my spine. "Obeyed?" The other me gestured toward the stranger. "I gave him the book. And in return, I was freed from its control." I shook my head, heart pounding. "No. You just let someone else decide for you." She smiled, slow, deliberate, and filled with something sinister. "And yet, here I stand, while you keep running." The stranger advanced. "Time's up." The library rumbled, the very walls seeming to pulse with a heartbeat not my own. The shelves twisted, bending impossibly as shadowy tendrils slithered between them. The woman beside me gritted her teeth. "We have to get out of here. Now." "Where?" I asked. "The whole place is alive." She turned to me, eyes filled with determination. "Then we rewrite the story ourselves." A rush of clarity washed over me. The book responded to me, but what if I could make it do more than just predict? What if I could shape the narrative instead of being at its mercy? I opened the book. The ink on the pages shimmered, writhing like living tendrils, as though resisting my interference. But I pressed my will into it, gripping the edges of the parchment as I thought not of what was written, but what should be. And then, the words changed. "The path will open." A deep groan reverberated through the library as a doorway materialized ahead, a grand archway filled with a pulsing, golden light. The reflection of me sneered. "You can't run forever." "I don't have to," I said. "I just have to go where you can't follow." The stranger lunged, but the woman grabbed my arm, and together we plunged through the archway. Light swallowed us whole. We hit solid ground with a force that knocked the air from my lungs. Dazed, I pushed myself up and took in our surroundings. We were no longer in the library. Instead, we stood in an endless expanse of floating bookshelves, suspended in a sky of swirling ink. The floor beneath us was parchment, shifting and forming words as we moved. The woman beside me let out a breathless laugh. "The archive." I turned to her. "What is this place?" "The heart of the story," she whispered. "Where all versions of every tale exist at once." A shiver ran through me. "And why are we here?" She hesitated. "Because you just changed the rules." A shadow moved in the distance, slithering between shelves. The echo of the stranger's voice drifted toward us, distorted but unmistakable. "You can run, but the story always finds its way." A book fell from a nearby shelf and landed at my feet. Unlike mine, this one had no title, no markings. Just a single sentence on the cover that sent ice through my veins. To win, you must become the author. The woman picked it up, flipping through the pages. Then she looked at me with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Do you understand what this means? I nodded slowly. The story isn't just being written for me anymore. I looked down at my own book, the pages now blank, waiting. It's mine to write. The air pulsed, the ink in the sky swirling faster. A choice lay before me, heavier than any I had made before. If I took control, there was no telling what would happen. But if I didn't? I turned to the woman, determination settling in my chest. Then let's write a new ending. As I placed my hands on the blank pages, ink began to form beneath my fingertips. The archive trembled, the story shifting. And somewhere, in the unseen depths of the library, a scream of rage echoed into nothingness. The story had changed. And this time, I was the one holding the pen. The ink on the blank pages danced under my fingertips, swirling into intricate patterns, as though the very fabric of reality was responding to my intent. My heart pounded in my chest, but I pushed aside the fear gnawing at the edges of my resolve. This was my moment. But the archive, alive with its pulsing rhythm of stories, wasn't going to let me rewrite the ending so easily. A ripple of energy coursed through the air, and the ground beneath my feet trembled. The ink above us darkened, gathering into ominous clouds that roiled like a storm about to break. The floating bookshelves around us creaked, as though protesting my defiance. The shadows between the shelves began to lengthen, shifting like serpents, coiling in anticipation. You can't change what's already been written, a voice rang out, cold and commanding. The stranger had followed us. His voice carried the weight of authority, like a person who had spent centuries molding the story to his will. He stepped forward from the darkness, his face now illuminated by the swirling ink. His coat fluttered, as if it were alive, wrapping around him like a shroud. He smiled, no warmth, no humanity, just a cold, calculating smile. You think you can escape your fate? The story has you. You are its creation. I looked at the woman beside me, my heart still racing. Her eyes were filled with fear, but there was also something else, an unspoken determination. You have to finish what you started, she whispered. But how? I asked, my voice strained. I don't know how to write the ending. I'm not. You are the author now, she interrupted. You always were. The book didn't just dictate your life, it shaped your reality. But you're no longer bound by it. You can make it work for you. I took a deep breath, glancing at the ink swirling in the air around me. The archive, once an ominous force, was now a living entity I could control. My fingers hovered over the blank pages, and I tried to push past the overwhelming tide of doubt. What do I want to write? What is the ending I want? The stranger sneered, as if he could sense the turmoil in me. You'll never defeat the archive. It will always find a way to bring you back under its control. You cannot escape its will. I glanced at the book again, feeling the power of creation course through me, and suddenly, I knew. The archive, the world around me, it was just a reflection. An endless loop of stories written by countless hands, bending the universe to their whims. But I was no longer just a part of that machine. I had the ability to reshape everything. Every word, every chapter, was mine to rewrite. I placed my hand on the book, drawing in a deep breath, and with every ounce of will I had, I began to write. The ink on the pages stretched and twisted, no longer obeying the whims of fate. The words shifted, becoming living things, characters and events written into existence with my power. The archive shook violently, as though it were being torn apart by a force beyond its comprehension. The ground quaked beneath us, and I could feel the stranger's presence growing stronger, his fury palpable. You're making a mistake, he growled, his form flickering in and out of focus. This isn't your world to control. But I wasn't listening. The ink swirled in my hands, transforming into a storm of power. I was the author now. The world around us began to bend and break. The bookshelves shattered into 1,000 pieces, the pages flying like birds scattered by a tempest. The ink clouds overhead crackled, lightning flashing in the distance. The ground beneath our feet splintered, revealing glimpses of endless voids, unshaped and untamed. "Stop!" The stranger screamed, but it was too late. The ink, the words, they had begun to obey me. The archive was no longer a prison. It was a canvas. Suddenly, a sharp cry rang out from behind me. The woman! She stumbled forward, a look of shock on her face, but it wasn't fear, it was awe. She was watching as the words I wrote began to take shape, coalescing into something new. Something unwritten. I wrote more, the words flowing like a river freed from its banks. Each word I wrote created new worlds, new characters, new possibilities. With a sudden motion, I wrote the final sentence: the archive no longer controls the story. And with those words, the last of the storm faded, the ink receding like a tide pulled back. The shelves, once twisted and alive with malevolent force, fell silent. The ink above us, once a dark and oppressive sky, now shimmered with light, transforming into the golden glow of new beginnings. I took a breath, trembling, but there was no fear. I had taken control. The story was no longer mine to follow, it was mine to shape. The doppelganger that had once mirrored me, the woman who had surrendered to the archive's control, was now nowhere to be found. She had ceased to exist, swept away by the force of my will. Beside me, the woman, the one who had stood with me through it all, smiled, her eyes soft with relief. "You did it," she whispered. "You became the author." I looked at the book in my hands. The pages were no longer blank, but filled with infinite possibilities. The pen was still in my hand, but I no longer had to fear the story. The archive was no longer a place of control. It was now a realm of creation, my creation. And as I looked up at the horizon of ink and parchment, a new chapter began. One where the rules were mine to write. The end? Or just the beginning?